Some of you know that I was diagnosed with prediabetes back in summer of 2020. This was diagnosed with what's called an HbA1c, which is a routine blood marker that checks red blood cell glucose saturation. Because red blood cells live about 120 days, this tells us over the last 3 months or so if our glucose levels have gotten high based on this lab result. Hi, I'm Joy Hoisington, functional nutrition coach and natural culinary specialist, and today I'm going to share with you how to reverse prediabetes and diabetes with 2 basic steps. If you are new here, I encourage you to consider clicking the subscribe button below and to turn on the notifications bell so that you can be notified when I post new videos on Thursdays each week. I have prediabetes and diabetes in my family history, so I likely have a genetic predisposition for diabetes. But over the last year, I was able to completely reverse my prediabetes so that now my HbA1c is in a completely normal range. Although weight has never been a struggle for me, fluctuation in blood sugar has always been a problem since childhood. I found as a child I constantly craved sugar and carb-rich foods, and that's pretty much all I ate in my day-to-day routine. I often would have blood sugar crashes that would leave me feeling shaky, weak, tired, and ravenously hungry. I also got very, very hyper or moody based on what my blood sugar was doing in the moment. Now, what goes on inside a person who is prone to prediabetes is that when sugar or carb-rich foods are consumed often and without fat and protein, is that the frequent spikes in glucose in the blood creates insulin resistance over time. So when you consume a food high in carbs or processed carbs like pasta or bread or something like sugar, your pancreas secretes a hormone called insulin. Insulin acts like a key to let glucose inside of the cells so that the glucose can be used for energy. But when our bodies secrete insulin too quickly or too much, as can happen with sharp rises in blood sugar, we end up with too much insulin, which leads to too much cellular uptake of glucose, leaving the blood low in glucose. And that is what we call a blood sugar crash. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem is that insulin receptors on cells learn to become less sensitive to insulin as a result, which is what leads to high blood sugar, is because the insulin, the key that lets glucose inside the cells, doesn't work very well anymore, which leaves us with high blood sugar. And this is essentially how type 2 diabetes develops much of the time. So the 2 things that I'm going to share with you today to reverse prediabetes or diabetes is, number 1, increase your fat intake and lower your carbohydrate intake. Research shows that the more carbohydrate-rich foods you consume, it tells your body to store fat and burn glucose. The more fat you consume, it tells your body to burn fat. So, to stay in fat burn mode, we must consume ample amounts of fat-rich foods. And the type of fat that you want to consume is mostly of poly and monounsaturated fats, which are essentially the omegas, omega-3, 6, and 9. These fats are high in fish of all kinds, nuts and seeds, olives, olive oil, coconut oil, nut butters, grass-fed butter, and grass-fed yogurt. One thing to pay attention to, though, is the omega-3 to 6 ratio. On average in America, the ratio is about 10 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 fats. But we want to aim for about a 4 to 1 ratio because every single cell in the body needs enough omega-3 fats for cells to be permeable enough to exchange nutrients and constituents in and out of the cells. Omega-6 is also more inflammatory for the body and is in many foods in the standard American diet. Omega-3 is high in flaxseed, hemp seed, fish, walnuts, and grass-fed dairy, grass-fed beef, also in organic eggs. Saturated fat is not necessarily bad for the average person, but there are some that are more sensitive to saturated fat. One thing I want to make sure is clearly communicated is that fat is not the enemy that people think it is. Our body makes cholesterol and saturated fat because it needs it. Our body depends on fat for survival. Without it, we could not absorb vitamins A, E, D, or K, which are fat-soluble vitamins. It is needed for blood clotting, nerve cell formation, and healthy muscle movement. The other interesting thing is that fat can be broken down and used for energy in the body in place of glucose through a process called ketosis. Not that I'm a proponent of the keto diet as a one-size-fits-all type diet, but for some, the keto diet is beneficial. Your body can also make glucose from protein through a process called gluconeogenesis. So, as long as you're getting enough fat, protein, and even carbohydrates from the right sources, your body will learn how to use more fat for energy than glucose. Number 2 is exercise. So, moving your body, whether you can do it at a gym or outside, moving your body is key. This is because exercise improves insulin sensitivity, for one thing, and depending on the type of exercise and how much, you can improve your body's ability to burn fat for energy rather than relying on sugar. This sort of bypasses the need for glucose and insulin altogether. Now, those with type 1 diabetes or those dependent on insulin are going to need to be working closely with a doctor as they exercise and make diet changes. And they will need to also be monitoring their blood glucose levels closely, as with any changes. Now, anybody can purchase a blood glucose monitor. I actually have one myself, and it's a basic device that looks just like this. And this is a really helpful tool to have for taking like a fasting blood sugar first thing in the morning when your glucose is lowest, just because you haven't eaten all night. It's also good for monitoring after meals to see if your body is responding poorly to the meals that you're eating, and if you're having some insulin resistance 2 hours after the meal, which is a good time to go ahead and get a reading. Now, for those without the need for insulin, you can reverse your diabetes and prediabetes very quickly. And even for those that do use insulin, with working closely with a doctor and monitoring your blood sugar levels, you can also make a huge improvement as well, just with simple lifestyle changes. But I do encourage everyone to be working with a doctor through the changes, though, just to be on the safe side, because it never hurts and it's always beneficial to just have your doctor there and to have in communication with you throughout the process. The type of exercise that is more important for blood sugar regulation is aerobic exercise. So there's 2 types of exercise. There's aerobic and there's anaerobic. And there are also 2 types of energy producing macronutrients, fat and glucose. Now, aerobic exercise puts us into a position where we can use oxygen to fuel the cells. And this bypasses the need for glucose for energy in that moment. So I tell my clients that to be at 60 to 70% of their max heart rate is going to keep them in this aerobic state. And this allows us to use much more fat for fuel rather than glucose. Although we're always using different percentages of each, but our bodies can be more dependent on fat as the energy source during this type of exercise when you're in this aerobic state. So 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, for example, what you would do is you would take 220 and you would minus your age from that. So for me, that's 185. And then you're going to multiply that times 0.6 and multiply it times 0.7. So for me, that is 111 for the 60% of my max heart rate and 129, which is at 70%. So if you wanted to wear a pedometer and just measure your heart rate during your exercise, you can aim to be in this range, which for the average person is going to keep you in an aerobic state. But some people actually, their aerobic threshold is lower. So they're going to shift into an anaerobic energy state quicker than some people. And I have worked with clients that have this issue, and especially with people on insulin, it can be tricky with medications and insulin on how to really train your aerobic base being on these medications. So for those, I would refer you out to a functional doctor that I refer my patients to kind of keep a closer eye on all of that. So staying in a medium pace jog with a decent cadence is going to be a good place for the average person, and making sure that you're getting at least 30 minutes of exercise 3 or 4 times a week. But some people are going to be able to go longer than that. Now, everybody is different, but for me, I feel best when I'm jogging about 3 to 4 times a week for about 45 minutes each time. When you start getting your heart rate up past the 60%, the average person will start to shift into an anaerobic state, which is where oxygen is no longer sufficient for the energy demand. So at that point, you're needing to use glucose, which is stored in the muscles. And if you're in this anaerobic state, you will burn through all of the glucose in your muscles, which is stored as glycogen. So this means that you are going to be burning through your glycogen stores in about 45 minutes of time for the average person. Every person only has that amount stored in their muscles at any time. So what happens is, when you're in an anaerobic state, you're going to run out of energy, and then you're going to have usually a major blood sugar crash after that, because you're going to start tapping into your blood stores of glucose, and then it's just going to get low, and you're not going to be able to keep exercising in that state anymore. And this is where many fitness programs like Orange Theory, CrossFit, and intense exercise programs have you in. They have you in an anaerobic state most of the time, because you're just doing such hard and fast exercise that uses what's called fast muscle twitching, and that requires the glucose for energy. Now, when you spend time training in this exercise state, you're going to be teaching your body to use glucose for fuel, which is the pathway that diabetes and prediabetes is really not good at maintaining, because it will lead to a blood sugar crash and then trouble getting it level again. Now, for those of you who really want to start working on your aerobic base and choosing the right balance of nutrition to support that, I encourage you to go ahead and schedule a free 30-minute assessment session with me if you feel like this is what you really need to do and that you want some support through this process. I left a link below for you to go ahead and do that, so feel free to schedule that anytime. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.